Hi, hello everyone. Today we are going to start a discussion on a new chapter, breathing and exchange of gases. Let's begin this. Oxygen is utilized by the organism indirectly to break down nutrient molecules like glucose and to derive energy for performing various activities. Carbon dioxide, which is harmful, is also released during the above catabolic reactions. The process of exchange of oxygen from the atmosphere with CO2 produced by the cells is called breathing, which is commonly known as respiration. Respiratory organs. A mechanism of breathing vary among different groups of animals depending upon their habitat and level of organization. Lower invertebrates like sponges, coelenterate, flatworms, etc., exchange O2 with CO2 by simple diffusion over their entire body surface. Earthworms use their moist cuticle. Insects have a network of tubes to transport atmosphere air within the body. Special vascularized structure called gills, which is used by the most of the aquatic arthropods and molluscs. Vascularized bags called lungs are used by the terrestrial forms for the exchange of gases. Among vertebrates, fishes are the one which use the gills, whereas reptiles, birds, and mammals respirate through their lungs. Amphibians like frogs can respirate through their moist skin. Mammals have a well developed respiratory system. Human respiratory system. We have a pair of external nostrils which open above the upper lip. Nostrils lead to a nasal chamber through the nasal passage. The nasal chamber opens into nasopharynx, which is a portion of the pharynx, the common passage for both food and air. Nasopharynx opens through glottis of the larynx region into the trachea. For your better understanding, the order will be nostrils, then nasal chamber, then nasopharynx, then trachea. Larynx is the cartilaginous box which helps in sound production and hence also known as sound box. During swallowing, glottis can be covered by a thin elastic cartilaginous flap called epiglottis to prevent the entry of food into the larynx. Trachea is a straight tube extending up to the mid-thoracic cavity, which divides at the level of the fifth thoracic vertebra into a right and a left bronchi. That means the trachea is the one which is a straight tube that is dividing into a right and a left primary bronchi at the level of the fifth thoracic vertebra. Now, each bronchi undergoes repeated divisions to form the secondary and tertiary bronchi and bronchioles, finally ending up in very thin terminal bronchioles. The trachea, primary, secondary, and tertiary bronchi and initial bronchioles are supported by incomplete cartilaginous rings. You have to remember this, those are incomplete cartilaginous rings. Each terminal bronchiole giving rise to a number of very thin irregular walled and vascularized bag-like structures which is known as alveoli. The branching network of bronchi, bronchioles and alveoli is comprising the lungs. Humans have two lungs which are covered by a double layer pleura with pleural fluid between them. This pleural fluid helps in reduction of friction on the lung surface. Outer pleural membrane is in close contact with the thoracic lining. Inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. You have to remember outer pleural membrane is in contact with the thoracic lining, but the inner pleural membrane is in contact with the lung surface. Next one, conducting part. It is from external nostrils up to the terminal bronchioles. This conducting part transports the atmospheric air to the alveoli, clears it from foreign particles, humidifies, and also brings the air to body temperature. Coming to the respiratory or the exchange part, alveoli and their ducts forms the respiratory or the exchange part of the respiratory system. This respiratory or the exchange part is the actual site for the diffusion of carbon dioxide and oxygen between the blood and the atmospheric air. The lungs are situated in the thoracic chamber, which is anatomically an airtight chamber. This thoracic chamber is formed by dorsally by the vertebral column, ventrally by the sternum, laterally by the ribs, on the lower side by the dome-shaped diaphragm. Coming to the steps that are involved in the respiration, first one, breathing or the pulmonary ventilation by which atmospheric air is drawn in and CO2 rich alveolar air is released out. That means in here we are taking the O2 inside and we are releasing the CO2 outside. Second step, diffusion of gases across the alveolar membrane. Third step, transport of gases by the blood. Fourth step, diffusion of oxygen and CO2 between blood and tissues. Fifth step, utilization of oxygen by the cells for catabolic reactions and resultant release of CO2. Coming to the mechanism of breathing. It involves two stages. Stage 1, inspiration, during which atmospheric air is drawn in. Second stage, expiration, by which the alveolar air is released out. The movement of air into and out of the lungs is carried out by creating a pressure gradient between the lungs and the atmosphere. Inspiration can occur if the pressure within the lung pressure is also called as intrapulmonary pressure, is less than the atmospheric pressure. That is, there is a negative pressure in the lungs with respect to the atmospheric pressure. But the expiration takes place when the lung pressure is higher than the atmospheric pressure. The diaphragm and a specialized set of muscles, external and internal intercostal muscles between the ribs, helps in generation of this pressure gradient. Inspiration is initiated by the contraction of the diaphragm, which increases the volume of the thoracic chamber in the anteroposterior axis. The contraction of external intercostal muscles lifts up the ribs and the sternum, causing an increase in the volume of the thoracic chamber in the dorsoventral axis. Increase in pulmonary volume decreases the intrapulmonary pressure to less than the atmospheric pressure, which forces the air from outside to move into the lungs, which is known as inspiration. Relaxation of the diaphragm and the intercostal muscles returns the diaphragm and sternum to their normal position and reduce the thoracic volume and thereby the pulmonary volume. This leads to an increase in the lung pressure to slightly above the atmospheric pressure, causing the expulsion of air from the lungs, which is called as expiration. Humans have the ability to increase the strength of inspiration and expiration with the help of additional muscles in the abdomen. On an average, a healthy human breathes 12 to 16 times per minute. Spirometer. The volume of air involved in breathing movements can be estimated by using a spirometer, which helps in clinical assessment of pulmonary functions. Coming to the respiratory volumes and capacities, the first one is the tidal volume, which means the volume of air inspired or expired during a normal respiration. It is approximately 500 ml, that is, a healthy person can inspire or expire approximately 6,000 to 8,000 ml of air per minute. Inspiratory reserve volume is the additional volume of air a person can inspire by a forceful inspiration. It averages around 2,500 ml to 3,000 ml. Expiratory reserve volume, the additional volume of air a person can expire by a forceful expiration. Its average around 1000 ml to 1100 ml. Residual volume, the volume of air remaining in the lungs even after a forcible expiration. It averages around 1100 ml to 1200 ml. Inspiratory capacity, total volume of air a person can inspire after a normal expiration. This includes the tidal volume and inspiratory reserve volume. Expiratory capacity, total volume of air a person can expire after a normal inspiration. This includes tidal volume and expiratory reserve volume. Functional residual capacity, the volume of air that will remain in the lungs after a normal expiration, which includes ERV plus RV, which means expiratory reserve volume and residual volume. Vital capacity, maximum volume of air a person can breathe in after a forced expiration, which is going to involve the tidal volume, expiratory reserve volume, and inspiratory reserve volume, or the maximum volume of air a person can breathe out after a forced inspiration. Total lung capacity, total volume of air accommodated in the lungs at the end of a forced inspiration, which includes the residual volume, expiratory reserve volume, tidal volume, and inspiratory reserve volume or vital capacity plus residual volume. Exchange of gases, where the alveoli are the primary sites for the exchange of gases. Exchange of gases also occur between a blood and the tissues. O2 and CO2 are exchanged in these sites by simple diffusion, mainly based on the pressure or the concentration gradients. Factors affecting the rate of diffusion, the first one solubility of the gas and the second one thickness of the membranes. Pressure contributed by an individual gas in a mixture of gases is called partial pressure and is represented as PO2 for oxygen and PCO2 for carbon dioxide. The solubility of CO2 is 20 to 25 times higher than that of the oxygen. The amount of CO2 that can diffuse through the diffusion membrane per unit difference in partial pressure is much higher compared to that of O2. The diffusion membrane is made up of three major layers, and these three layers are very important. The first one is the thin squamous epithelium of alveoli, and the second one is the endothelium of alveolar capillaries, and third one is the basement membrane, which is present between the epithelium and the endothelium. The thickness of the diffusion membrane is less than a millimeter. Coming to the transport of gases, the blood is the medium for transport of oxygen and CO2. About 97% of oxygen is transported by RBC in the blood. 3% of oxygen is carried in a dissolved state through the plasma. Coming to the CO2, nearly 20 to 25% of it is transported by RBC, whereas 70% of it is carried by bicarbonate and 7% of it is carried in a dissolved state through plasma. Transport of oxygen, hemoglobin is a red color iron containing pigment present in the RBC. O2 can bind with hemoglobin in an irreversible manner to form oxyhemoglobin. Each hemoglobin molecule can carry a maximum of 4 molecules of O2. Binding of oxygen with hemoglobin is primarily related to partial pressure of oxygen. The other factors that are responsible is partial pressure of CO2, hydrogen ion concentration, and the temperature. A sigmoid curve is obtained when percentage saturation of hemoglobin with O2 is plotted against the partial pressure of O2, and this curve is known as oxygen dissociation curve. In alveoli, factors favorable for formation of oxyhemoglobin are high partial oxygen, low partial carbon dioxide, and lesser H plus concentration and lower temperature. All these four factors will favor the formation of oxyhemoglobin. Coming to the dissociation of oxygen from the oxyhemoglobin in the tissues are low partial oxygen and high partial carbon dioxide and higher temperature and high H plus concentration.
For every 100 ml of oxygenation, blood can carry around 5 ml of oxygen to the tissues under normal physiological conditions. Coming to the transport of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is carried by hemoglobin as carbaminohemoglobin about 20 to 25%. RBC contains a very high concentration of the enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, and minute quantities of this carbonic anhydrase is present in the plasma too. For every 100 ml of deoxygenated blood, delivers approximately 4 ml of carbon dioxide to the alveoli. Coming to the regulation of respiration, a specialized center which is present in the medulla region of the brain, called as respiratory rhythm center, is primarily responsible for the regulation of respiration. Another center which is present in the pons region of the brain, called pneumotaxic center, can moderate the functions of the respiratory rhythm center. Neural signal from this center can reduce the duration of inspiration and thereby alter the respiratory rate. A chemosensitive area is situated adjacent to the rhythm center, which is highly sensitive to carbon dioxide and hydrogen ions. Receptors associated with aortic arch and carotid artery also can recognize the changes in the CO2 and H plus concentration and send necessary signals to the rhythm center for remedical actions. The role of oxygen in the regulation of the respiratory rhythm center is quite insignificant. Coming to the disorders of the respiratory system, the first one is asthma, which is defined as difficulty in breathing causing wheeze due to the inflammation of bronchi and bronchioles. Second one, emphysema, which is defined as chronic disorder in which alveolar walls are damaged due to which respiratory surface is decreased. Cigarette smoking is the main cause of emphysema. Coming to the third one, occupational respiratory disorders. In certain industries, especially those involving grinding or stone breaking, so much dust is produced that the defense mechanism of the body cannot fully cope with the situation. So, longer exposure can give rise to inflammation leading to fibrosis, causing proliferation of fibrous tissues and thus causing serious lung damage. Workers in such industries should wear protective masks. I will post some important MCQs on this chapter in the upcoming video. Thanks for watching.